For years, the south of Burkina Faso waited for rain, waited for food, waited for hope. And every season, the sun answered louder than the skies. The fields cracked, the seeds died, and the people prayed. But one day, the waiting stopped, and the digging began. 78 kilometers. No IMF loans, no EU conditions, just the hands of our people and the fire of our will. This is not just a canal. This is a declaration that Burkina Faso will feed itself, water itself, build itself, because we are not too poor. We are too proud to beg. This canal is not just a channel for water, it is a channel for freedom. Burkina Faso is a land of resilience, but even the strongest hearts cannot harvest from cracked earth. For decades, the southern regions where most of our farmers live faced a silent war. Not a war of guns, but a war of drought. The rain came late, or not at all. Crops failed, livestock starved. Entire villages migrated north in search of survival. Meanwhile, trucks rolled in with sacks of imported food, wheat from Europe, rice from Asia, corn we could have grown ourselves. But every bag carried a hidden cost, dependency, vulnerability, a message that said, "You cannot feed your own people without us." Behind closed doors in Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, they ran the numbers. They said Burkina Faso was too dry, too unstable, too poor to build its own irrigation network. The experts gave reports. The donors gave promises, but the people received nothing. And so, year after year, we waited. While our children went hungry, while our elders watched the land they once cultivated turn to dust. But deep beneath the surface, something was shifting. Not in the soil, in the spirit. The people had not given up. They were just getting ready. The dream of the canal did not begin with concrete and bulldozers. It began in 2003 as a quiet idea, a whisper between engineers and ministers who dared to imagine a different future. They called it the Mega Canal Project, a bold plan to carry water from the Bagre Dam in the north down to the fertile but thirsty lands in the south. But dreaming was one thing, building was another. For years, the project sat on dusty shelves. International donors showed polite interest, then walked away. Consultants came and left with their fees, leaving behind only PowerPoints and delays. And so, nothing moved. Then came 2020. A new administration took office, one that no longer wanted to wait for permission, no longer willing to trade dignity for handouts. They pulled the project off the shelf, not to renegotiate it with the IMF, but to give it back to the people. The blueprints were redrawn, the costs recalculated. The mission was clear: build it ourselves. Or not at all. And so it began. 78 kilometers of canal, stretching from the Bagre Dam to the southern farmlands near Ouagadougou, entirely built by Burkinabe engineers. No Western contractors, no foreign consultants, just local knowledge, local labor, and local pride. The cost, $43 million, a fraction of what international firms would have charged. But the real value was never just in the money. It was in the message. We can do this. We don't need their loans. We don't need their conditions. We have the will. We have the skill. We have the right. Despite security threats, logistical challenges, and international skepticism, the work pressed on. Every trench dug, every concrete wall laid, every meter completed was a statement, not just of engineering, but of sovereignty. And in 2024, after years of silence, the ground spoke. Water began to flow. When the water began to flow, it did more than soften the soil. It changed the economy. First came the jobs, thousands of them, not just for engineers and machine operators, but for young men with shovels, for women running food stalls near the work sites, for carpenters, drivers, welders. The canal did not just carry water, it carried wages. It carried pride. It gave people something the global market had never given them: a paycheck born from their own land, their own labor. And then, something extraordinary happened. The seeds began to respond. Fields that once cracked open in despair now stood green and defiant. Rice paddies returned. Sorghum fields expanded. Vegetable gardens sprouted behind village homes. Farmers no longer prayed for rain. They planned for harvest. Imports began to shrink. Less rice from Asia, less wheat from Europe. The balance sheet changed. Burkina Faso was no longer just a buyer. It was becoming a grower, a producer, a nation with enough to feed its people and maybe one day, its neighbors. But the impact did not stop in the fields. With more crops came more opportunity. Small food processing plants opened in rural towns. Grains were milled locally. Fruits were dried and packaged. Cold storage hubs were built along the canal. A quiet industrial awakening was underway not in the capital, but in the villages. It was no longer just about farming. It was about building a full economy from seed to shelf, from soil to salary. And underneath it all was something even deeper, a shift in power. Because when you grow your own food, you control your own future. When you build your own canal, you decide where the water flows. When you stop depending on foreign aid, you start writing your own story. This canal is a symbol of that story, of a nation no longer waiting for saviors, of a people choosing self-reliance over dependency, of a government willing to bet on its own engineers, its own farmers, its own strength. It is proof that Africa's path to prosperity does not need to be paved in foreign debt. It can be carved through native soil, by native hands, and it has only just begun. My name is Baba Issa. I am 68 years old. I was born in a dry season, and for most of my life, I lived in one. I remember when we used to walk 2 hours to fetch water, not just for drinking, but to keep a few tomato plants alive. Some years, we harvested nothing. Other years, we begged God for just enough millet to last until the rains came again. I have buried neighbors who died poor. I have seen young men leave the village, chasing hope in cities that gave them none. I stayed, because this land is where my father stood, where his father stood, where I, too, would one day fall. But then came the canal. I remember the first day the water reached us. It was early morning. The children ran ahead of me, barefoot in the red dust. I thought they were joking. They said, "Grandfather, the river is moving through the ground." I followed them, slowly. My knees don't work like they used to. And there it was, a ribbon of life, cutting through the dry earth, flowing, steady, beautiful. Since that day, everything has changed. My fields are green. My grandchildren eat vegetables every day. My daughter sells yams in the town market. And my youngest son, he says he will stay. He wants to farm. He wants to build. That's how I know this canal is not just water. It is dignity. It is future. We used to say, "Only rain can save us." Now we say, "We saved ourselves." I never went to school. I don't know what the IMF is, but I know what it means when your children stop crying from hunger, when your land listens to you again. They told us we couldn't do it. They said we were too weak. But I have seen weak men build strong canals. And I have lived long enough to say this Burkina Faso will rise not because others allow it, but because we refuse to stay down. They said we couldn't do it without them. They said we needed loans, technical advisors, permission slips from Paris and Washington. But Burkina Faso made a different choice. No IMF, no World Bank, no EU budget support with strings attached. Just $43 million raised, saved, and invested by the people, for the people. And with that, a message was written into the soil, not with ink, but with shovels and concrete. We will no longer trade our sovereignty for statistics. We will not exchange our independence for spreadsheets stamped approved in Geneva. This canal is our declaration of defiance, because aid, when given with conditions, is not help. It's a leash, a tool of control dressed up as generosity. For too long, Africa was told to be grateful for every drop of water, every bag of rice, every loan with interest. But now we are building the well. We are planting the grain. We are rewriting the terms. Burkina Faso is not refusing partnership. We are refusing servitude. And in that refusal, there is power. Because true freedom is not about waving a flag. It's about who writes your budget, who controls your food, who gets to say yes or no. With this canal, we said no. And in that no, we found ourselves again. The canal may lie within the borders of Burkina Faso, but its ripples are reaching far beyond. Across the Sahel, other nations are watching. Mali, Niger, Chad countries battling the same droughts, the same dependency, the same whispers that say, "You are too poor to build your own future." But now, they have seen what is possible. A landlocked country, under pressure, under sanctions, under threat yet still able to dig 78 kilometers of life into the ground, not with borrowed hands, but with its own. This canal is not just infrastructure, it is precedent. It is proof that development can rise from within, that African nations do not have to wait for permission or debt packages to take the first step. In West Africa, discussions are already shifting. Ministers from neighboring states are studying the Bagré model. Delegations have visited the site. Engineers are asking, can we replicate this along the Niger River? Can we link this to ECOWAS food corridors? Can we trade water, not just goods? And more importantly, can we break the pattern of begging? President Ibrahim Traoré has said it clearly. We are not anti-West. We are pro-dignity. His message resonates beyond Ouagadougou, in Accra, in Bamako, in Kinshasa, even in Soweto and Port-au-Prince. It is a message of renewal, of African control over African development. Because when one country builds without chains, others learn to loosen theirs. In the long term, this canal is more than a farming tool. It is a weapon against despair, a signal to youth that staying home can be a choice, not a punishment. A blueprint for how Africa can feed itself, employ itself, grow itself on African terms. And one day, perhaps, canals like this will connect not just regions, but movements. Movements that say, enough with scarcity, enough with foreign dependency, enough with the narrative of failure. We are the continent of sunlight, of rivers, of resilience. We are not a problem to be solved. We are a force to be reckoned with, and it all begins with water. So here we stand, at the edge of a new chapter, not just for Burkina Faso, but for all who still believe in the right to build without asking for permission. This canal, born from the soil of Africa and the strength of its people, is more than an engineering feat. It is a rejection of dependence, a rebuke to those who said, "You can't." A roadmap for every nation told to stay in its place. Burkina Faso has made its choice. Not to wait, not to borrow, not to beg, but to rise. And for the children of the African diaspora watching this from Chicago, from Atlanta, from London and Paris, know this: the fight for dignity is not only in your streets, it is also in our fields, in our rivers, in the hands of a farmer who chose to stay, in the voice of a leader who dared to say no. The struggle for sovereignty is not abstract. It is irrigation pipes. It is factories. It is food on the table grown at home. And as President Ibrahim Traoré declared at the inauguration, we dug this canal not to follow orders, but to free ourselves from them. We did not ask the world to save us. We asked the land, and the land answered. So if you ever wondered whether Africa can lead itself, build itself, feed itself, look no further than this river of hope. Let this canal remind you the future of Africa will not be imported. It will be made here, with our hands, on our terms, and we're just getting started.